And then that okay thing.
Yep, so you're live now.
All right, this is Senate Transportation, Wednesday, January 15th.
No, it's appropriation.
What did I say, transportation? I'm so used to saying that.
Not to correct it, Chief.
Yeah, when they need to be corrected, you should definitely. This is Appropriations Committee, Senate Appropriations Committee. And we have the title Director, Executive Chief Fiscal Officer of JFO here, Captain Brennan, to just introduce herself, because when we did JFO the other day, wasn't here, so welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm Catherine Benham. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer, and I manage the Joint Fiscal Office, which I think you all know well, I hope. And I'm just here to say I'm excited to work with all of you. I think this is a great committee. You have, as you know, you have Amy and Elle here in the room all the time, and Emily is leading up the budget team. But if you have any questions, feel free to, if you see me in the hall and you need anything, catch me if you want, or ask any questions. I don't know if you have any questions of me now. And I was also going to introduce a new member of our office, who is James Duffy. He's sitting right back there. James joined us. We're excited to have him. He's working on energy and natural resources, as well as other fiscal issues. As you know, we juggle whatever comes our way. So sometimes we shift depending on what the demands are. So he's going to be covering that as well. And he has a background in energy, which will be helpful in the energy discussions as we move forward.
I do have a question because the senator asked me about the JFO offices. And they know it's the Pink Lady building next door, but do you welcome people to walk over there and track you down, or is there a better way to do that?
Well,
do we need to get a tour of the building? You can,
if you'd like a tour, I'd be happy to give you a tour. We are the first floor and the second floor right now. And
is there a third floor?
There is a third floor, and the legislative council team that does judiciary, so it's Michelle and Eric and Ben are on the third floor. The rest of the attorneys are in Tuakin. But we're in the Pink Lady. We call it the Pink Lady. It's on our webpage. When we have a separate webpage from the General Assembly. When you get into it, that's where we post the budget things.
We're going to go over your website today.
Okay. So there's a General Assembly page, and there's a lot of useful information there, but on the budget stuff, a lot of it ends up on our page because there's so much of it, and that is, you will hear about that. And if you have questions, ask us. And you're welcome to come in. If you want a tour, we'd be happy to. I'm on the first floor. You need a badge to get in. If you have your badge, it should open the door. And
can you get in the front door? You have to go to the back.
No, there's a swipe card on the front. Okay. It's just a little bit offset because they have the windows on the side of the door, so it's on the other. So you have to kind of be quick. Swipe. You can't, if your hands are full, because I've been there, it doesn't quite work. And you're absolutely welcome to come over. You can also email people, or you can also, if you see, like Elle and Amy can also, if there's somebody in particular, you want somebody on transportation issues, you can ask Logan, they can get Logan. So whatever works for you all. And there's phone numbers, but I think people use email more. I don't know, do you all teams, do the
How does the committee know?
Okay. So, and you're welcome. It's going to be an interesting year. And this is a great committee. They're going to be a really good committee to be doing budget. And the other nice thing is you get to work on the budget, and there will be a budget. Like that's what I was like, no, it's going to be a budget. It's going to happen. And you'll figure it out.
Yes, that's their goal, but not delay everybody else from going home because there isn't a budget yet, because there has to be a budget.
There has to be a budget, yeah.
The last train.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Great,
thank you so much.
So I forgot before, Catherine, I do have a slightly adjusted committee assignments, but I think most people didn't have any changes. Tried to give more to Senator Westman, but he's a tough negotiator, so we'll have to find other tasks.
I complained to him
Probably
that he didn't have it. No,
oh no, that's the parking.
Thank you. Oh, Bob,
Okay.
great. I'm glad you're doing all the judiciary and public safety and all that.
We'll maybe even post it to our board over there if we ever need to look at it. Okay, with that, unless anybody else has any other questions or announcements as far as budget assignments go, anything else? We'll have Amy come up. Are you going to do your PowerPoint presentation?
I'm going to try.
Okay.
So Amy Polk for the Joint Fiscal Office, do you mind if I just move that? I'm going to rumble through this, I don't know.
And is the presentation would be on the website as well?
So yes, you can. You can go onto your the committee website. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Norris.
I'm sorry.
Not a problem.
Not paying attention.
Let's see if we can. How's everything looking? That's looking pretty good. Okay. We're going to go over just some general concepts and ideas about what it needs to be on Senate appropriations. We often, when we would do these 101s in the past, there's lots of spreadsheets, and so we're trying to make this a little bit more fun and more conversational. So as you know, you see things, we can have a conversation about what we're talking about, and we can go from there. So the budget is different from all of the other bills, and one of the things that we like to call the appropriations bill is the big bill, and so we have an actual picture of the bill just for some humor. Do you want a hard copy? Okay.
Yes, I do.
I just said that's just one.
Oh, just
Yeah.
one, but
Yeah.
I
I
don't.
think we got it.
Are you good? Okay. So that's
That's last year's budget.
Yep.
yeah. So what I
Oh.
have. So if you don't want to turn to look at the
Oh, I see.
presentation, you can
I
just look
see.
at that if you
Okay,
like.
great. Yeah, thank you.
Or you could bring it up on your,
Or you can use your computer. It's up to you.
I'll
Whatever
get this for
works
now.
best.
This is good.
Okay. So, you know, the appropriations bill can also be considered, you know, the power of the purse. You have you can make a lot of decisions about specific policy items that you're making priorities on. And you're really providing all three branches of government with the authority to spend money. We've got, let's see, I'm sorry, I have a lot of things on my screen. As Catherine was mentioning, what's great about the appropriations bill is that you will be involved in a bill that will pass. It's a must-pass bill. Government does not run without it, and it's typically one of the last bills that is passed on the last day of the session. And the Appropriations Act is how the General Assembly grants the spending authority to all of the departments and organizations across state government. And we don't always think of the appropriations bill as a policy bill, but it really is, because you're making specific priorities. You will be coming to a point where you'll be making some difficult decisions about what you will and what maybe you won't be able to authorize funding for. And so we have this cute little pig for you to remember, you know, to kind of put your money where your mouth is in terms of, you know, what policies that are the most important to the General Assembly. And then the other kind of concept we want you to think about is, you know, when you're in your policy committees, you will be working on very specific things that are very important to you, very important to your constituents. But when you're in appropriations, you can begin to you're really looking at the entire picture of state government. And that's when a lot of difficult decisions are made, different conversations that you'll be having. And that this is you're looking at that sort of 30,000 level of what's happening across state government and where you want to spend money. And you might have seen this at our all-member briefing, where you'll be working on your individual bills, potentially in your policy committees that you're working with, and those are really important bills that you are working on. But you can also think of it as there will be appropriations potentially in some of your policy bills that really should be looked at in your committee here in appropriations, and you're looking at all of the expenditures, all of the priorities, and then how do they fit in to the bigger picture of the Appropriations Act and the expenditures across state government. So this is sort of one of the ways of looking at what you're doing every day is where is the money coming from? So when there's a new proposal specifically, it's good to think about where would the money come from in order to pay for that expenditure, and then obviously how much is it going to cost. Occasionally, you may think if there isn't any additional revenue, are there other areas in state government that, we use this word cut, but, that maybe wouldn't need to be funded at this point in time, or doesn't need to happen anymore. Sometimes programs sort of end over a couple of years. Are there ideas that people have on how to raise money? How will this impact the budget in the future? And specifically, there's a new program with positions. Those positions would probably be funded for multiple years. So thinking about not just the cost of the program that you're being asked to consider, but over time, over several years, is there an investment over a period of time? And then are there fixed costs, like I just mentioned, around positions, operations, and space? So sometimes we think about just sort of grants. That's often what you'll be hear a request. But if there's programmatic requests, then you have to think about the whole picture of what it costs to operate that program. And then we have some other sort of related questions and thoughts that you should be thinking about as you're looking at the requests that come in. And this is even the governor's recommend. This isn't just new things, but what is the governor recommending? You should think about the same types of things. How does this proposal stack up against all the other legislative priorities that you're working on? Is this a one-time expense, or is it a recurring in future budgets, which is a good question to always be thinking about when new, especially specifically with new programs. And then what is the problem? What problem does the proposal solve? And there's sort of a little gear that all relate to each other. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about what is the state budget, and the budget's a plan. And as you may have I've seen in some, over years that I've been involved in the budget, you work really hard to come up with the actual, amount of money that you're appropriating, and then 6 months later, somebody comes in and says they need more money or they need less money, and it can be frustrating because you've done this prioritization throughout the session, but really it's a plan. And so you have to think about, there is some flexibility in what you're appropriating, and the next, in 6 months you may be hearing that the actual budget proposal may have changed. So the budget includes the appropriation of funds from the available sources, and you may have heard us talk over the past few days, when we've been in here, that we aren't legislatively required to do a balanced budget, but that is something it's a good fiscal decision that the General Assembly always does. And so we are appropriating based on just what the revenue forecast is, which Chris Roop will be in here tomorrow rather, to talk about revenues and forecast revenues. And as I mentioned, this being a plan, the budget is not set in stone. So as you'll be hearing on Friday, Commissioner Gresham will be in talking about the budget adjustment for the current fiscal year that we're in. And then the following week, you'll hear the governor's proposal for fiscal year 26. So it does get a little confusing right about next week, because you'll be hearing proposals and you'll have to remember what fiscal year the proposal is being discussed and being requested. When I first started in the Joint Fiscal Office, we were gathering together, and Catherine asked, what are you most looking forward to? And I said, just seeing how the puzzle is what's going to happen at the end of the day. How do all these pieces come together? And I will say, last year was my first session, and I do remember thinking many days, I don't understand how this is all gonna fit together, but it always does. And that's, as Catherine said, we always get a budget, it always works out in the end. It's a little stressful, but maybe a lot stressful, but it happens, and it's a really amazing thing to be a part of. Some things to think about, fiscal years. If you've been in the legislature for a while, you probably, this is pretty elementary, but our fiscal years are July 1 through June 30th. So we are currently in fiscal year 25, and then it starts to get confusing when we start talking about fiscal year 26 while you're in fiscal year 25, but that you'll be working on the governor's budget for 26. That starts July 1. It even gets more confusing once you find out more about what's in the budget, because in the budget for 26, we actually sometimes make changes for the current fiscal year. So it'll be fine, but it does get a little confusing. So another important thing, the way the budget is organized. So you have some copies of this current year's budget. It's organized by function of government, and you each have sort of assignments. For the most part, they kind of follow the function of government, but as you can imagine, the Agency of Natural Resources will be in, I think it's the 700s, in natural resources, and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is in that area, state government, transportation, obviously. But where things get a little more confusing finding areas is general government and protection to persons and property. Would you like to guess where the Agency of Agriculture is located in one of these?
In the protection.
Any other guesses?
I'm gonna go
Geez,
natural resources.
yeah. Commerce and community development.
Yeah, so it definitely is an agency that covers a lot of areas, but it is protection to persons and property.
Whoa.
Chair wins.
Because they have the weights and scales.
And they have, there are, regulatory, I think sometimes is another way to look at it. They're protecting,
Yeah.
They're protecting the public, and
Gasoline.
but Department of Environmental Conservation, which is regulatory in some ways, is in natural resources. But general government, I know. So, it's a little tricky. So if you can't find your area, let me know, and I'm happy to help you out.
And this is the way when we look at the numbers of the budget, these are the categories that the numbers are based on.
That's right. And so it starts, general government is in the 100s, and then it goes all the way to the 900s in transportation.
It might be good just to have an org chart up there, and they have all of them listed within protection.
Yes.
All of this, so.
And
And just put it on.
we have that, so I will send that to Al, and we can
Perfect.
get that on there. It's a great suggestion. I think Grady's gonna go over how the budget's organized, but just as a little tip, the B section is organized in this order, and then the E section is also organized in the same way, and so the B and E's are connected to each other in the budget, and the E refers back to the B section and how the money should be spent. So that'll be our part of the puzzle that we'll be working on. And the budget is, you can hear the theme that I've been sort of saying this afternoon, but the budget is a series of trade-offs, and there's a lot of challenges. I don't think any of these are probably surprising. We have unfunded liabilities around pensions. I think maybe the treasurer might have come in and talk about the investments that have been made and why we should continue to invest the way we have been. Flood recovery over the past couple of years has obviously been a bigger thing than we've heard we had Irene back in 2011, but it's certainly happening more frequently. Homelessness, housing, the cost of workforce, education, finances, it's all there. And there's more than just that. We have other uncertainties around the economy, staff turnover across state government and our partners in the communities, capital needs, school construction, the judicial system investments, healthcare. We could probably have a whole brainstorming event on all of the uncertainties, but these are just some. And then on top of that, you have your budget pressures that are sort of normal, regular part of running any kind of organization. And we call, our annual salaries and costs pay act, which was in last year's budget and is, I think of it as the agreement that the administration has made with the State Employees Association. And so that's a negotiation that happens, and the legislature often funds that, or usually funds that. The cost of benefits for state employees and OPEB for pensions, operating costs, caseload and program pressures, which you'll be seeing in budget adjustment in the Medicaid program, and other base needs. So these five here are typically, they are commitments, I think, that the legislature makes. Obviously, you want to learn more and understand them in more detail, but they are typical budget pressures that we see every year. So now we're going to get, I think, a little bit, now we're going into sort of revenue, but at a very high level, and we can have Chris Rupert can come in and talk a little if you have any more detailed questions. But the total budget last year was $8.7 billion. If you come into my office, I have that number. My little fun fact. And so last year, or the current fiscal year, this is sort of a chart, page 21, that shows where, kind of using that same concept of the areas of state government, where the funding is appropriated, and education and Medicaid are our top areas where funding is appropriated. And this is broken up by federal funds and state funds. And then, we're right into human services, protection, which are sort of a lot of different areas of state government, not just sort of state police. Talked about agriculture being one of them, and transportation.
Do you want to say why you titled that unduplicated?
Sure. So at the end of so we have a web report where we'll have two numbers. One is we will appropriate like over 10 billion, and it's a duplicate. Those are duplicative costs. So something like internal services is one where I think, let's do Medicaid, global commitment. And you'll see this when AHS comes in, when human services comes in, and they show you their ups and downs. And one of the first pieces you'll see is where they sort of make global commitment, and they use general fund and federal fund for the total expense of whatever the program is. And then later on in that department, further on in the ups and downs, that department will then spend that global commitment. So it's you'll see that total cost twice, and then we total it up in that way. So that's why we call it unduplicated or duplicated, and we usually show you the unduplicated.
Does fee for space count as duplicated?
Yeah, so internal services where a human resource is using
you'll see a line in every single budget for fee for space,
fee
and
for
then
space.
it goes to buildings,
Yep.
and then they spend it again, so it's done twice. So it wouldn't be fair to count that twice. That's the easiest one I can think of.
That is yes, thank you. Let's see, so fiscal year 2025, state versus federal funds. So we're going to do a little math. We're not going to do math. We're just going to do. I thought no, we have two different.
There's some additions.
No, we have two PowerPoints, and I think this one is not the one with math, or the one without math. So we have $8.7 billion is the total budget, and so we're kind of going to show you. We're going to bring it all the way down to general fund, and then we're going to talk about general funds. So, we have about $3.1 billion of federal funds, and you had that, I showed you that graph before where we had at the bottom of each of the columns was, do you need some of that sun?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah.
Sorry.
That'd be good.
So in February it comes to me.
Right there, yeah.
Don't want you to be in pain while I'm doing this, too, in pain. Here,
Thank you.
so we have $3.1 billion for federal funds, and this is transportation has federal funds, and then human services has some federal funds. And education fund has 2.3 billion. There's a little bit of, this is the state portion of the transportation fund, and then other special funds, which I can talk a little bit more about if you'd like. And then now we have, the general fund is 2.3 billion. And so we're going to talk a little bit about where does all that 2.3 billion general fund go? And that's really where a lot of your conversation ends up being in appropriations. It's a lot of things, but typically you spend a lot of time on the general fund. So we had a one-time of $182.5 million. We want to remember to use one-time funding with one-time expenditures. And I think what's really more important is not to use one-time funds with ongoing pressures. So if you have an ongoing pressure where you're hiring a position for a program, we don't want to use necessarily one-time funds for that. We want to make sure there's going to be money for that position as long as the program is in existence.
So when we get into the budget, you'll see that we'll have kind of a box, our budget for one-time expenditures and a budget for ongoing expenditures. That's how we kind of limit ourselves for not making that mistake of funding ongoing revenue or ongoing expenses with one-time revenue.
Exactly. So yeah, generally used to address one-time spending issues or are reserved for future uses. And we had two different types of one-time funding last year. We had actual source of funding available, which was $68.5 million. This was some of those investments, including some $25 million for education funds to buy down some property taxes, money for general assistance, state college bridge funding for tuition, and a variety of other expenditures. But then we had a contingent list, and that was sort of because we thought maybe that revenues were kind of coming in a little bit higher than forecasted in January. And so we thought, well, we'll have, and by when I say we, you, thought we would have a contingent list. And if there was some additional funding above the forecast, because you do a balanced budget, you're only going to budget based on the revenue forecast. But if there happened to be some additional funding, there were some priorities and where the General Assembly wanted that money to go. And those were fully funded last year.
And that's normally the 12 million for the pension plus. If that was kind of a plan that we were going to, a commitment we made, but we put it in contingency with the knowledge at that time we knew there was going to be money at the end of the year.
Yeah, things were going well.
So we were pretty confident that that was going to get funded. So as a way, it was kind of a one-time, but we did have to wait till the fiscal year closed out to see if that money was going to be spent. Senator Wilson?
So there was a list in the base budget of what, and I will use for an example, couple items in transportation, the 12.5 million to make a match that we set aside, that the governor put in. So that's not on the one-time list, but it's really a choice in here. And there was the 12 million for in transportation that went towards the purchase of EVs, that they've run through the money on that. I can't remember on the balance sheet where those things all showed up, because those are not, they're really like one-times.
I don't remember. I will look.
I know they were in the governor's base budget ahead of time, setting them aside, but they were really in their own separate little box. It is really.
Okay. I don't remember the transportation piece. But I'll talk to Logan and I'll make sure to,
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they weren't transportation spending items, they were general fund items.
okay. Yeah, we can look at I'll look in a little bit more into the budget.
And I think there were a few things separate from that, but I can't remember that the governor set aside, and we agreed with that, but they really were one time.
So they were, so that's interesting. So you think we put it in the base even though they were one time?
I don't know,
Okay,
I
I'll look
can't
into it.
remember
Yeah, I
exactly
know, I can't
how
remember
we
either.
accounted for them.
Yeah. Okay, so base funds, so we have, this is general fund again, 2.263 million, which is really 2.2 billion. Base funds are included in the official revenue forecast, as I mentioned, and are expected to reoccur in future years. Again, ideally, base funds support base expenditures, ongoing programs, and operations of state government. So just sort of, again, stressing that base funds, ongoing costs, one-time funds, one-time expenditures. This is just another way of, kind of looking at where we're investing our general fund, and Medicaid is, global commit, it's like our global commitment match. And it sort of lines up with the previous chart that I provided to you. The emergency board adopted a revenue forecast in July, and about 172 million was above the revenue that we used for fiscal year 25. And so we're going to get an update on that next week. Is it still 172 million? Is it more or less? And then that number will be probably used in the governor's recommend that he'll give his speech in a couple weeks.
When you say that is it additional from the January,
yes,
which we based the budget on. So basically we did a budget and then we found out we had $172 million more, even after the contingency for fiscal year 25, which we're in. And then they're going to update that again next week. And that'll be what was used for the DAA.
And I think Commissioner Gresham can go into more detail about any plans in the budget adjustment that they had for any of the additional revenue from July.
They do have plans.
They do have plans. Yeah, and it's we can send that around. It's public. It's on the JFO website. I don't know if it's on the JFO website, but it's on the House
Committee. Approach is going through.
Yeah.
And we'll start doing that next week.
So then here's a little bit about revenue. Again, Chris Roop is who should speak more to any questions you have about this. But this is just sort of giving you an idea of where the money is coming from and going into the general fund. And we have similar for transportation fund and our education fund. And then, other areas of funding sources are federal funds, so block grants that the, federal departments give our state departments, global commitment funds, which I sort of talked about. Nolan Lingle will be able to talk about sort of a 101 on Medicaid funding. Special funds are sort of, they're created in different ways. Sometimes it's a tax that goes into a fund and then you appropriate a specific purpose for it. Sometimes you transfer general fund into a special fund and then you appropriate for a specific purpose. There are a lot of special funds, and we could spend a lot of time talking about them, but we do not have to do that today.
Just a quick question of curiosity. The 1% option tax. I believe it's 70% for the municipality township, it's 30% to the state. Correct me if I'm wrong, obviously. How much does that generate statewide? Roughly.
Talking about that, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you?
I don't remember the total.
Yeah.
I remember that there's a balance.
Yeah. It's on my notes back in the office, but Chris will know that. I'll make sure he has that for you.
Which we'll be meeting.
Yes, that's right, we will.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then other sort of miscellaneous funds. Statutory reserves, they're not available for discretionary use. We hear a lot from our revenue team, about how these reserves are looked upon as positively from our rating agencies. We're saving money for, emergencies and rainy day type situations. They're set up, there's a formula, certain percentage of previous year's appropriations go into these different reserves. The stabilization funds for each of the three bigger funds, general fund, ed, and transportation funds. There's a rainy day fund. The human service caseload reserve is specific for human services because sort of how I talked about how the budget's a plan, they're budgeting sort of their assumptions about the caseload and their assumptions about the cost per case, and things change. The economy changes, as humans we change. And so they have a dollar amount that's set aside to help at the end of the fiscal year to pay their bills. And then the 2753 reserve is, we put a little bit of money each year into this reserve, and it's 27 pay periods, occurs occasionally. Mostly we get paid 26 pay periods. And so instead of having to find the money to pay for that 27th week, we put a little bit of money away, so it's easier to pay that bill when that comes, and it's every handful of years that happens. And then the 53 reserve is that there's sometimes 53 weeks for Medicaid and Medicaid type programs. And so again, there's just a little bit of money that we set aside for that so that we can pay that bill as well.
And I think that general fund is 5%.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And then remember, there was those of you who were here last year on the floor, there was a question about to the appropriations committee about should it be higher than 5%? Why did we pick 5%? And what I've heard from JFO is that the rating agencies want to make sure we have a minimum, but it's not, if we have 5 and get an A rating, we don't get an A plus if we get a 10, because they really just want to make sure that we're at the minimum. We get very little benefit from the rating agencies for going over what they consider as financial improvement. You get some benefit, but not a lot.
So the question, are you counting in the 306 all of the stabilization and the rainy day?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I don't think so.
I think you're right, but as she has it listed in the piece, there's a total difference between the makeup and the language around the difference between those two.
Yeah.
And it would be helpful for the committee because quite frankly, people will come in and say, you have all these reserve funds, why don't you spend them? And it's very important to understand what the distinction is between them.
Particularly, we'll hear about the rainy day fund. It's like, well, it's raining, they'll say.
Yeah.
And so we should tap into the rainy day fund.
Yeah, and they'll come and they'll say that to us.
Yeah, I will make sure to get more details for everyone.
And guaranteed, if you go into the rainy day fund, the bond rating agencies will downgrade us.
So I had given you sort of a very complicated and wordy calendar for the session, but this is sort of the whole, in a simple way, the whole budget process starts in September with the governor, and they're given some guidance and some guidance on where their budgets should come in, maybe 3%, maybe a cut, maybe an increase. And then the governor does budget meetings with departments, and they develop, the budget office develops a recommendation, and you'll be hearing that recommendation in a couple of weeks based on the revenue forecast. And then January and March, The House will be working on the budget. You can also work on the budget, but the House has possession of it. As soon as the speech is done, and then the Senate has, you'll start around February, once the budget adjustment is done, through April, and then a conference committee. Typically, the House and Senate don't always agree. So you'll do a conference committee. Sometimes it takes a couple weeks, and then off to the governor for approval. So just to sort of summarize, fund based with ongoing revenue and strategic investments with one-time funds, being diligent about the revenue outlook in future years. There is usually a few extra years in the revenue forecast, not just next year, but those are a couple of 2 or 3 years after 26. Understanding and maximizing federal funds and drawing down with match, and assess and understand the status of investments. And that's just asking those questions when departments come in to your committee. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Amy on this overall budget process? Okay. You do have one?
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I feel like there are things that we can go over, not during this time.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sounds good.
She'll be available. Mr. Nixon.
Good afternoon, Grady Nixon, Joint Fiscal Office. So again, I'm the fiscal editor for the Joint Fiscal Office. So what I do is edit all of the documents our office produces, and then I also am the bill coordinator, so the point person for all of the language for the Budget Adjustment Act and the budget itself.
All the sneaky stuff in the back.
Defer to Senator Russman on that one.
You have a presentation?
I'm just going to be sharing my screen. So this afternoon, I'll just be going through a little bit about how our website works and some of the documents that you can find there. So right now we're on the General Assembly website, and I just wanted to show you that here at the top of the website, if you're not familiar, you can click there, and that quickly brings you to our website if you forget the URL, and then vice versa, you can click on our website and get back to the General Assembly's website.
Grady, just for the committee's purposes, the reason I thought this would be helpful, because as you're working through your sections of the budget or just trying to think about the budget, there's a lot of tools that JFO has on their website that I want to make sure people knew how to get there and what they were.
So on the homepage of our website, off the bat, I'll just show you, we don't have the actuals for October, November, or December up yet. But we have these fund tracking charts. These are new to our website. So you'll see for the 3 major funds, the general fund, the education fund, and the transportation fund, the revenue trackers are just now right on the homepage, which is an exciting thing. Then below that, you'll see featured publications. So these are some of our more recent publications and some of the more significant publications. So for instance, the PICUS report was a significant report that came out in October. So we have it on our homepage for easy access. And then below that, you'll see publications by subject. So there are little tiles here where you can see subject tutorials, 101s. That's where briefing documents that some of our analysts will present to you live. You'll see education, budgets by department, information on the capital bill, and so on. And then that is the same as what's on this tile up here under subjects. So the same things that are below on the tiles are right there. appropriations and budgets by department are probably the two tabs that are of most relevance to this committee. I'll get into that a little bit later. Under the publications tab, you'll see the 5 major publication types that our office puts out. So fiscal notes are for every bill with a fiscal impact. So the Joint Fiscal Office produces these when a bill is first introduced, and then they are updated throughout the bill process. So here we have passed by the Senate with further concurrence of amendment for 687 Act 181. And on the fiscal notes, you'll always see that there's a hyperlink to the bill itself. So you can click there and that will bring you to the webpage where the bill lives. Then there will be a bill summary, which is like an executive summary for it, followed by the fiscal impact, which is, I would say, is kind of part of that summary section where it pulls out major fiscal impacts of the bill.
You're saying that as fast should be a live link?
Yeah, so I'm seeing here that that's a dead link.
Based on that?
But if you go to so for instance, that link is live, so they should all be live links. Following the fiscal impact and bill summary section, fiscal notes will always pull out section by section the sections that have fiscal impacts. So if there's a section where there's an appropriation or a fee change, the fiscal note will section by section explain where those fiscal impacts happen. So these are really helpful when the committee is reviewing other bills. Particularly, it's been the practice of appropriations committees to oftentimes pull appropriations out from other bills to include in the budget bill. So those are very helpful for knowing when the committee needs to do that. The next publication I'll talk about is Fiscal Facts. So this is an annual publication that we put out that has a lot of fiscal history of the state. So you'll see information on revenue, state indebtedness, major fund summaries, and then a lot of comparisons to other states. So those are helpful, less for understanding trends in our own state, but understanding how we compare nationwide. There's also information on demographics. We put out an annual demographics issue brief that I'll explain issue briefs in a moment, and then further revenue details. So this is a helpful book for just understanding the historical context of revenues and expenses in the state. And then at the end of Fiscal Facts, we include the web report, which I'll get into a little bit later. But that's one of the most important tools that the committee will be using during the budget process. So Fiscal Facts, even if you weren't on appropriations, you might be familiar with it. We drop it off on everyone's desk, sort of ideally toward the beginning of the session. Next, we have the Fiscal Focus newsletter. This is something that we also distribute to the entirety of the General Assembly. So this lands in your inbox 3 times a year. This is just a newsletter to keep the General Assembly well apprised of fiscal goings on during the off session. So obviously the past 2 years, flooding was a significant event that occurred and during the off session. So it was important to keep the entire General Assembly aware of that because both the Emergency Board and the Joint Fiscal Committee had to take swift action to address those crises. So issue briefs, as I mentioned earlier, these, some we put out as one-offs if there's a particular issue. For instance, last year there was some concern about the federal government shutting down, so we put out a brief on what happens when the federal government shuts down. And then others we produce annually, like the demographics issue brief, which uses census data to show particularly how the different age brackets in Vermont have shifted. Very similar to fiscal notes, there will always be an executive summary, and then the meat of the subject happens after that. I would say for issue briefs and fiscal notes, the executive summary is good if you're short on time and don't have time to read the whole thing. And then there's always this little blowout box. So if you really don't have any time, then you can just read that. And then finally, reports you can find here. Oh, I think there's a bit of overlap.
Whatever that graph was interesting.
Yeah, that's, that graph is kind of funny because it looks like there's a big jump there, but it's just because 85 or 80 plus is all in one group. So it looks like there's a massive jump in the population, but it's just reflective of the fact that that's everyone 80 and older. So reports here, some reports are required by statute, like the tax expenditure report and the basic needs budget. And then others are required by session law. So the General Assembly frequently wants us to take a closer look at an issue, and they'll put in law that we do that. For some of those, like the PICUS report I mentioned earlier, there will also be money appropriated to our office so that we can hire an outside consultant. So for that study in particular, both the nature of what it was researching and the nature of that workload, we had funds appropriated to our office to contract with PICUS and Auden Associates. I would mention on the reports page, so unlike other publications that are ordered just chronologically, on the reports page, they're ordered by subjects, and then within that, they're ordered chronologically. So unless you know the report that you're looking for, the subject matter that it addresses, it's a little bit more difficult to find things on there because it's not just chronological. I would also just mention briefly the search function on our website, just because of how metadata is attached to various things on our website. The search bar up top is not the most useful tool. For instance, if you're looking for something on healthcare and you type in healthcare, it will pull up a lot of documents and information that you probably won't be looking for. So I would recommend going and searching by subject area or type of publication. And then worst case scenario, we are obviously all available to help you. On the Joint Fiscal Committee tab, if you click committee, you'll see a brief explanation of what the Joint Fiscal Committee is. There aren't members listed yet, of course. Then you'll see featured resources. So again, sort of similar to our homepage, this is where some of...
Why do you say of course? We just announced them 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I know.
What is it?
You're right. Ledge IT should have been on it. Sorry, there's a lag again. Featured resources, there we go. Featured resources similar to the homepage. This is where the most recent documents will appear. And then there's some information on grants toward the bottom of the page. There's some interesting historical documents on the right side of the page here, including statute, and some information on the Pink Lady, which is the Joint Fiscal Office's office. The most helpful thing here is the past meetings tab. So if you go to any of the past meetings, there will be all of the supporting documentation for that Joint Fiscal Committee meeting, including the Fiscal Officer's Report, which contains a lot of similar information to our newsletter. It's a document that we produce just to make sure that the Joint Fiscal Committee is aware of things that are going on that aren't necessarily included in the presentations that they're seeing that day. There'll also be reports, so the Joint Fiscal Committee very frequently will receive the reports that the General Assembly asked for in session law. So if you're looking for a particular report and you're not on the Joint Fiscal Committee, that's a helpful place to find those. And the agenda for the Joint Fiscal Committee will always have hyperlinks to presentations and documentation that the committee looked at during that meeting. So if you missed a meeting and want to catch up the agenda is a very helpful place to go for that. And you can also then sort of like the same with the committee agenda, you can click there for the live stream, which will bring you to the YouTube page. About, so if you click contact and you don't, if you're looking for one of us and you're not sure how to reach us, this has every staff member, our emails, and our work phones.
I really appreciate that because in general, the administration doesn't have specific numbers for anybody. It's very frustrating. So that you guys make it that easy, I really appreciate it.
And you can always call the JFO main line too. And if you
It's way easier to email you directly.
right.
Sometimes you don't answer the phone.
To be honest, I barely know how to use the phone. So, going back to subjects. So, as I mentioned before, appropriations and budgets by department are probably the two tabs that you'll be using the most. If you click on budgets by department, it's organized by fiscal year, and you'll see similar, this is also how they're categorized in the budget, like Amy mentioned a moment ago. But these are where the documents that the administration, other folks that testify, it's where those documents live. So that's a helpful place to find those. Of course, you can also find them on your committee page. I think that the easiest way to find those documents, if you're searching for them on the committee page, is to go to witness. It's just a lot easier to find documents by witness than any other means. And then appropriations and budget. So I'm going to click on FY25, our current fiscal year. It has, if you scroll to the bottom, it's sort of reverse chronological, where the Gov recommend budget documents are at the bottom of the page. Then you'll see the House budget documents, Senate budget documents, conference documents, budget as enacted, and just recently the governor's budget adjustment proposal. A lot of the documents are similar from one stage to the next. So you'll see governor recommend, web report, and language. And then once we get to the House, there's the web report that has the House's changes from the governor recommend. Then we'll produce for both chambers similar documents. So that has the summary of House appropriations budget, and then I prefer this document, which is a one-pager that summarizes the budget. I would note that for both the House version of this document and the Senate version, what this shows here is not the change from the Gov Rec or the change from one chamber to the other. This is a summary of the budget in its entirety. So this includes things that were in the Gov Rec, and then the Senate version of the document would include things that were in the House version of the bill as well. So as a comparative document, it may not be the most useful, but as just a way to understand what is in the budget, I find it to be quite useful. And then you'll also see the bill language here. So for the budget and the budget adjustment, not only can you use the bill page to find that information, but you can also use...
Where's the best place to find the Outlook or balance sheet?
The best place to find the
Outlook or the balance sheet?
Hold on a moment. So do you mean the Ed Fund Outlook?
Well, you had the Ed Fund Outlook, but you have the balance sheet for the budget, for the general.
You know what, I'm not sure. I don't know if you know, Amy.
Let's see. The revenue.
Which sheet are you talking? Are you talking about the end sheet where we show the governors, the House, and Senate?
No, we have an ending balance sheet as of, it has the reserves at the bottom and
Yeah, monthly tracking station?
Do you mean the general fund tracker?
No, the balance sheet,
So not this.
yes, that's it.
That's
You
the
can
plan.
have the tracking, but then you have, yes. Yep,
Yeah, so the most recent version of that will always be right on our homepage. So we will always have that featured publications, general fund, education fund, and transportation fund. So the most recent version of that will always live there. Just going back to appropriations and budget. So this is the web report, which I'm not sure if you've heard much about yet. This is probably the most important document for your work. You'll see that as the bill process goes along, more columns will be added to this web report. So the initial one will just have this GovRec column, and then the House change, then the House column, Senate change, Senate, so on. So you'll see here for each number section of the budget, there will be this outlay that shows all of the numbers here. And you'll see that in this instance, the House didn't make any change, and neither did the Senate. This is one where they did. So here, the Senate accepted the House accepted the GovRec, so there's no change. And then some sections will have notes explaining a change. So in conference committee, for instance, they moved the funding for the pension plus payment to the contingency list that Amy mentioned in her presentation. So the conference change, you'll see, it looks like the conference took out $12 million there. And then the note explains, don't worry, it still made it into the bill. It just was removed from section B104.1. So those are very helpful just for understanding the changes. And you'll see here this House explanation, that would be when the bill comes to the Senate, you'd be looking at that and understand that note there. And each of these sections live at the beginning of the budget bill. So tomorrow, when I go over that a little bit, you'll see that each section here corresponds to an actual section of the budget itself. But the only numbers that appear in the budget are whatever stage it's at that given moment. So you would just see, for instance, when the committee concludes its version of the bill, you just see these numbers in the Senate column here in the bill itself. And I think that might be all I have to show you for now. I don't know if the committee has any questions.
And hopefully this becomes helpful when you start getting some of these documents. If you want to go find them, you know they're here. If you try to do it all with paper, at least I found it very difficult because you have a pile of paper and you're trying to flip through them all, like where is that one? And you're easy to look at the wrong one so it's well organized, I think, the site where you can find it. But you take some time to go there a few times there where you understand where to go.
And I would note for the committee too, I know Amy mentioned the fiscal year thing, not always corresponding with the calendar year. So be aware during the budget adjustment process that those documents will live in the FY25 section. So you'll need to click on FY 2025 when you're working on the budget adjustment, and then when you're working on the budget for the coming fiscal year, all of those documents will be in FY 26. So you'll be working in two different fiscal years for a little while.
Any other questions for Brady? Okay.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Brady. So, just for committee process, we sent that thing around earlier about paper or electronic. I think today was a good example of we're making sure we have this. So when anybody has a presentation, like Amy did, especially when you're sitting over there, it's very hard to see the screen. So I think that's just kind of where we need to know, like, if anybody, any witness has a presentation, those that want to print out should get a printout of it, because it's just difficult for those. And also it's helpful if you want to take notes while they're talking, and it's hard to do if it's on the computer. So just make sure you tell Elle, if you want to make sure you get a printout for any presentation, then she'll get you one. I follow along here. Sometimes people's printouts, they're not easy to read, so you can like blow them up on the screen like that. So that's that. Emily's going to talk about the BA a little bit before we go into it, but Emily's not here. So I'm going to say that we have adjourned till 2:45 when Emily's going to be available.